Shalom, Chavarim. Today I want to talk to you about the third temple. As many of you know, biblical prophecy implies the existence of a third temple in the last days. Now, there was a time when it seemed that fulfillment of that prophecy was unlikely, or certainly there was question as to how that could possibly happen. And then the Jewish people returned to the land, and then there was a restoration of a modern nation of Israel in the land. And yet, even in 1948, that nation didn't have control of the Temple Mount. And then in 1967, there was an Arab war launched against Israel. Israel prevailed, gained territory, ended up capturing the Temple Mount in 1967. But even then, it seemed that the dream of a third temple was yet future. And it was yet future to that time. But more recent events are happening that seem to be culminating towards the restoration of the temple and the building of a third temple on the Temple Mount in the not too distant future. That's what we're going to talk about today. Before I get started, I need to ask people to please donate to support this work. You can donate by sending donations by PayPal to donations at wnae.org. That's donations at wnae.org, or by clicking on the donate link in the video description. We do need your support to make these videos happen and to make the research that we're doing on Hebrew and Aramaic New Testament origins and the Jewish roots of faith and the ancient sect of Nazarene Judaism, the original Jewish followers of Yeshua. All of that research, we need your financial support, and we are putting most of that material online free for those that are helping us. You're the ones that make it happen. Okay? Also want to ask everybody to please like the video, subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell so you get notified when new videos come out. Let us know what you think in the comments. Participate in the discussions in the comments. Share these videos with your friends on social media, by email, in private messages, etc. All right. So a number of things have been happening, and I think it's really kind of interesting, I would say, that it seems that in many ways the coming about of modern Israel in 1948 seemed to be a byproduct of the Holocaust. And it seems that maybe certain things, certain Temple Mount restoration events that are happening now are happening to some degree as a result of the October 7th Holocaust in Israel. Okay. But it actually began before then because, of course, Elohim foresaw things. There's been an organization for many years now, many decades now, called the Temple Institute. And they have been building the furnishings, manufacturing the furnishings for the temple, a menorah for the temple. They have been training Kohanim, priests, for the temple and in the temple rituals and the temple prayers. And one of the things that is needed to restart the temple rituals are the ashes of the red heifer. And as many of you may recall in the news, a little over a year ago, probably about a year and a half ago. There were, I believe there were 3 red heifers here in Texas, where I'm podcasting from, that were bred, that met the requirements, and that were transported to a secret location in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. And so the red heifers are standing by. And another element that has fallen into place just recently is that some of you may not know this, okay? Those that aren't really familiar with Israel and some of these things may not know this, but historically, there's something called the status quo, if you will. Once Israel took the Temple Mount in 1967, they allowed the Muslim authorities under the state of Jordan to continue to manage, we'll say, the Temple Mount. And in the interest of maintaining peaceful relations with the Arab populace, Jews were prohibited from going up on the Temple Mount. Later, they were allowed to go on the Temple Mount, but they weren't allowed to pray, do anything that, prostrate themselves, do anything that could be interpreted as a ritual, okay, as some kind of worship or religious ritual. And even if their mouth was open or their lips were moving, if they were seen doing that, the Jewish authorities, the Israeli authorities, would escort them off the Temple Mount and get them out of there, and they weren't allowed to do that. Okay, this has been a serious contention in Israel because there's no freedom of religion. Only Muslims are allowed to pray on the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is the holiest site to the Jewish people. Okay, to Judaism. Muslims claim it as their 3rd holiest site, but it's the hands down holiest site in Judaism. And so Jewish people were not being allowed to pray on the Temple Mount. Something has recently changed. On the 9th of Av, this last 9th of Av, August 13th of this last year, not too terribly long ago, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is a parliament member in Israel, but he's also head of Israel's security, and therefore the security of the Temple Mount. Itamar Ben-Gvir is also a right-wing Israeli, a settler, so-called settler type, and he is a religious Zionist, Orthodox religious Zionist. So what happened is that in August, he went up on the Temple Mount and he prayed and he said, it's okay to do this now. In fact, I'm reading here from a article that was in the Times of Israel, August 29th of 2024 is the article. And let me just go ahead and I'm going to read through this article with you. I'm going to do something I don't usually do and read through some significant news pieces that fit together on what's happening. Now, this is a big step, okay? What we're reading about here is a big step, okay? So the title of the article is Open Jewish Prayer, Prostration on Temple Mount, Now Routine, activists say. So it's Open Jewish Prayer, Prostration on Temple Mount, Now Routine, activists say. And it says under that, in recent weeks, police are no longer preventing or penalizing acts at Holy Site as Ben-Gvir pushes practice and are allowing them on a daily basis. The article begins. Open prayer and prostration on Temple Mount by Jewish worshippers is now a matter of routine and permitted by the police on a daily basis, activists for prayer rights at the Holy Site have said. There's actually a picture here of Jewish worshippers prostrate themselves on the Temple Mount during a daily prayer service at the Holy Site. The practice was witnessed during a visit to the Temple Mount by the Times of Israel on Wednesday, where an afternoon prayer service was conducted out loud. So this wasn't even mouthing anymore. This was out loud, a prayer service. Activists say the prayers take place during morning and afternoon services every day. The prostrations are conducted on the eastern side of the Temple Mount, Esplande, out of sight of Muslim worshippers, but in full view of the police who accompany Jews during their visits and who previously did not allow such prayers under the decades-old vague status quo regarding conduct on the Temple Mount. Prostration on the Temple Mount is considered a special form of religious worship and even a distinct religious commandment in the right spot on the site, which is why the ability to carry out the practice has been welcomed enthusiastically by Temple Mount activists. Prior to August 13th this year, that's the 9th of Av. The 9th of Av is the day on the Hebrew calendar that is a day of lamentation and mourning for the destruction of both the first and second temples. Both occurred on the 9th of Av. Prior to August 13th this year, police would, in general, detain and remove Jewish and non-Muslim visitors engaging in demonstrative prayer such as prostration. A police officer briefing visitors before their visit would also instruct them not to engage in demonstrative prayer. But such instructions are no longer being given, it appears. The new practice first gained attention on August 13th, which this year was the date of the Jewish feast of the 9th of Av, when worshippers who visited the Temple Mount at the same time as National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir prostrated themselves and prayed out loud. Police did not detain or remove any of the worshippers who engaged in such demonstrative prayer. Ben-Gvir insisted then and subsequently that his policy as the minister and authority over the police was to allow Jewish prayer at the site. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has sought to play down the development, asserting that there has been no change to the status quo. But Ben-Gvir brushed off his protestations and prayers have continued uninterrupted. One key Temple Mount activist who has been involved in lobbying for the greater Jewish prayer rights at the site for many years told the Times of Israel that although the changes since August 13th were substantive, he did not believe they constituted a change in the status quo. Discreet Jewish prayer has been permitted by the police since at least 2018, during the tenure of Gilad Erdan as police minister. According to the activist, who wished to remain anonymous, that move was the real change to the status quo in recent years. He added that along with the ability to prostrate oneself, the police also permit prayer with singing and dancing on the eastern side of the Temple Mount, although this reporter did not witness such activity during Wednesday's visit. At the beginning of the visit, a group of some 30 people, mostly men, but including some women and children, ascended to the Mugabe Gate from the entrance to the Western Wall Plaza, singing, and they will prostrate themselves to God on the holy mountain in Jerusalem, a verse from the biblical book of Isaiah. As is the general procedure for Jewish visitors ascending during visiting hours for non-Muslims, the group was taken by a police escort around the Temple Mount, counterclockwise from the southwest corner of the plaza to the eastern side. Upon arriving there, numerous members of the group bowed down facing west to where the sanctuary of the ancient Jewish temples, plural, was located in full view of police. The worshipers also prostrated themselves during the afternoon prayer service, which they conducted with the relevant parts of the service performed out loud. 2 activist rabbis then gave short lessons, lasting a few minutes each, before the police instructed the group to conclude the visit, coming around the northern end of the site and out through the chain gate. Veteran Temple Mount activist Rabbi Yitzhak Brand, who, unusually for such activists, is ultra-Orthodox. Most Haredim oppose visits to the site. That's a halakhic issue that we're going to talk about somewhat. Gave one of the lessons, noting the ability to perform prostration without restriction since August 13th. We quote, "We must give thanks to God that we have now merited greater closeness to God. Prostration is already a special form of worship on the Temple Mount and the site of the temple, and this is another stage in the redemption," Brand told the group of worshipers. Notice that he says stage, because this is happening in stages. Rabbi Ofer Eliashiv, another ultra-Orthodox activist who has been visiting the Temple Mount for just a few years, also extolled the newfound liberty to bow down at the holy site and, like Brand, insisted it was another step towards the final redemption. Like Brand insisted it was another step towards the final redemption. What final redemption? Of course, the rebuilding of the temple. The completion of the ingathering, quote, "the completion of the ingathering of the exiles is prostration on the Temple Mount. On the 9th of Av, an opening was created by God, and prostration was formally allowed on the Temple Mount," said Eliashiv. "Everything begins slowly," he said. "We are beginning to build the infrastructure from the temple." Speaking on Army Radio on Monday, Ben-Gvir, a longtime proponent of Jewish prayer, writes, on the Temple Mount, predating his time in politics, insisted that Israeli law does not discriminate between the religious rights of Jews and Muslims at the Temple Mount, which is considered the holiest site in Judaism and the third holiest in Islam. "The policies of the Temple Mount allow prayer, period," Ben-Gvir said. "You are allowed to pray. It's illegal to prevent you from praying," close quote. Again, if he would asked if he would put a synagogue on the site, if he could, he answered, yes, 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 yes. In response to Ben-Gvir's comments, Netanyahu issued an oft-repeated statement insisting that there was, quote, "no change to the official status quo on the Temple Mount," close quote, but avoided mentioning his ultranationalist coalition partner by name. So let me interject here editorially. There's a reason for that. And this is all happening, as I said, just like the nation of Israel modern nation of Israel in 1948 was born out of the most very unfortunate reality of the Holocaust. This is in part happening, being born out of the unfortunate reality of the October 7th Holocaust. Why do I say that? Because there's this governing coalition that existed before the October 7th events. It was the most conservative coalition in the history of Israel. It was made up of Likud, which is similar to America's Republican Party. It's a conservative party, a secular party but it has great respect for religious tradition, and in coalition with the Orthodox Jewish Shas party, which is an ultra-Orthodox Sephardic party, and an ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi party, and a religious Zionist party that was actually sort of a coalition of two parties joined together. So this coalition, Itamar Ben-Gvir is one of the principal leaders of one of the religious Zionist groups that make up this coalition. So Netanyahu needs him in the coalition to maintain his governing coalition. So he has to tolerate things that he might not otherwise want to tolerate. And so, he's giving some lip service to the idea that the status quo hasn't changed on the one hand. On the other hand, he's not even mentioning Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Itamar Ben-Gvir, he's not stopping really Itamar Ben-Gvir. He really is not in a position to stop this from happening. He's not in a position to end his governing coalition, especially in the middle of this war. Okay. So the unwritten status quo at the site in the past provided few restrictions on Muslim prayer and access to the Temple Mount and its Islamic holy sites, while non-Muslims, including Jews, were not allowed to pray and could only visit during limited time slots via a single entrance to the site. Police began allowing discreet prayer around 2018, although the restrictions on access to the site for non-Muslims has remained in place. Israeli security officials view changes at the Temple Mount as having the potential to set off mass unrest, as the Temple Mount has been the scene of frequent clashes between Palestinian protesters and Israeli security forces, and tensions at the disputed compound have fueled past rounds of violence. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who by the way was recently fired, but Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who has increasingly clashed with Ben-Gvir in recent months, has accused the minister of endangering Israel with his comments. Ben-Gvir's actions endanger, quote, Ben-Gvir's actions endanger Israel's national security and its international standing, close quote, Gallant wrote on X on Monday. By the way, as I said, Gallant has since been fired. Not for this, but nonetheless, he's gone. Ben-Gvir fired back, accusing Gallant of, quote, bowing to Hamas and dragging the state of Israel into a reckless deal, close quote, in reference to proposals for a hostage release deal and ceasefire agreement with Hamas at in the Gaza Strip. Another article from JNS dated September 11th, titled Record Number of Jews Visit the Temple Mount. It says at least 51,672 have made the ascent since last Rosh Hashanah, a 14% rise over the previous year. So more Jews than ever are visiting the Temple Mount. It says the number of Jewish visitors to the Temple Mount has surpassed all previous years since the liberation of Jerusalem in 1967. As of September 6th, 51,672 Jews have visited the holy site since last Rosh Hashanah, according to the Biyarda Returning to the Temple Mount organization. As the beginning of the month of Elul, September 4th, from some 48,144 Jewish worshippers had ascended since last Rosh Hashanah, marking a 14% increase from the 44,317 Jews who visited the Temple Mount throughout the entire previous year. This number of Jews who visited this past year also surpassed the previous record from 2 years ago, when 47,988 Jews visited the Temple Mount during 5782. A turning point in the number of visitors has recorded after the return of Israel to the Temple Mount Conference held at the Knesset on July 24th, where National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir announced the prayer policy of the political echelon. A 45% surge was recorded during this period compared to the same time last year. However, despite that declaration and following the comments made by Ben-Gvir in recent days, where he called for a cessation of anti-Jewish, quote, racism, close quote, on the Temple Mount with regard to who's allowed to pray there, and stating that if it were up to him, he would build a synagogue on the Temple Mount. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that there is, quote, no change in the status quo, barring Jews from worshiping there. President Yitzhak Herzog also reiterated that Israel has, quote, an unequivocal commitment to preserving the status quo at the holy site in accordance with the political agreements laid down since 1967 with Jordan, and in spite of the rulings by leading rabbis and religious figures over the last 100 years. However, not all rabbis agree that the status quo is non-negotiable. Rabbi Stephen Berg, the CEO of Aish, a Jewish educational institution located opposite the Temple Mount in Jerusalem's Old City. You may have seen some of the Aish videos online. Said in a recent interview on ILTV, it's almost surreal to hear people arguing so vehemently against people being able to pray in a holy site. I think there needs to be a conversation about how everyone, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, could be allowed to pray and to reach out to the Almighty from all the different religions that believe in one God. Quote, I think people should be allowed to pray on the Temple Mount. How the structure will be and what that would look like, that is a real conversation that should happen. I feel that we shouldn't ban anyone from praying in any place where they feel they could reach out to the Almighty, he said. In fact, there is a scriptural premise for this. In the book of Yeshayahu, Isaiah 56, verse 7, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations. That's my editorial insertion. That's not in the article. Berg added that the threat of violence as repercussions to prayer and religious worship, quote, is a premise we shouldn't accept. There needs to be a conversation about it. The Temple Mount should be a place of unity, not a place of distrust. Ben-Gvir said in an interview with Army Radio on August 26th that Jewish prayer is allowed on the Mount. That prompted the denial from the Prime Minister's office, which stated that policy at the holy site is determined by the cabinet and the Prime Minister. A statement published by the Prime Minister's office on Monday said, quote, last night, at the start of the Security Cabinet meeting, Prime Minister Netanyahu declared that on the issue of the Temple Mount, there is no change in the status quo, nor will there be. The Prime Minister repeated his directive that government ministers are not to visit the Temple Mount without his approval in advance via his military secretary. The Temple Mount Administration activist group reacted to the report of the record-breaking number of visitors, saying, quote, it is heartening to see the people of Israel returning to the Temple Mount. The increase in the number of worshipers ascending the Temple Mount, even during times of war, makes the return of Israel to the Temple Mount a living and existing reality. This surge has many contributors: the tens of thousands of visitors, the commanders and police officers who visit the Temple Mount remains calm, peaceful, and safe for visits. National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, who tirelessly works for positive progress on the Temple Mount, and also Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, has been enabling and encouraging this positive transformation for a decade, close quote. And this brings us to an article in Israel National News, Channel 7, that's Arutz Sheva, dated August 27th, 2024. The article is titled, "A Synagogue on the Temple Mount, ? Temple Institute Founder Answers." Remember I mentioned the Temple Institute earlier. Temple Institute, it says underneath that, Temple Institute founder and dean of the Temple Yeshiva, Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, speaks with Arutz Sheva and voices support for the establishment of a synagogue on the Temple Mount. The article reads, Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, the founder of the Temple Institute and dean of the Temple Yeshiva, sat with Arutz Sheva, Israel National News, for an interview following the renewed debate regarding the Jewish visits to the Temple Mount. The debate surrounding the issue was rebooted after National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said that he would establish a synagogue on the Temple Mount. Asked if Ben-Gvir's remarks crossed a line, Rabbi Ariel answers, quote, "The real question is, who draws that line? For us, God is the one who draws the lines which were set forth in the Torah and during the return to Zion in the land of Israel and Jerusalem after the 6-day war." Rabbi Ariel harkens back to the days after the war when he was assigned to guard the Dome of the Rock and the site of the Holy of Holies in the temple. Since then, I haven't left the position. We must protect the place that is our line, and we have no other, close quote. Regarding rabbinical rulings prohibiting entry on the holy site, Rabbi Ariel emphasized, to be honest, there was never a discussion on the matter at the chief rabbinate. There were decisions made, but there was never a discussion about entering the mount. According to him, there is no sweeping halakhic ruling prohibiting entry. He notes that quote, there isn't even half a document that confirms this. Rabbi Ariel recounts that he spoke with Minister Ben-Gvir and reminded him that the idea to build a synagogue on the Temple Mount is not a new one. He mentions the Chief Rabbinate Council's decision from the 12th of Av, 5760, that's August 13th of the year 2000, 24 years ago, which decided to hold deliberations regarding the construction of a synagogue on the Temple Mount. Quote, that means there was a Chief Rabbinate decision to discuss the matter and not to prohibit entry to the Mount, close quote, Rabbi Ariel says. Rabbi Ariel also mentioned claims made mostly by Haredi rabbis that visits to the Temple Mount provoked the Gentiles, especially during such a sensitive time of war. He emphasized that whoever says it's prohibited to revoke the nations of the works disagrees with the Torah. The entire book of Deuteronomy talks about inheriting the land and settling it, and there is no place to fear the nations. Rabbi Ariel concluded by mentioning the stance of Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Kook, which was communicated in a letter by the late Haifa Rabbi Shir Yeshuv HaKohen, according to which everything possible must be done to restore Jewish control over the Temple Mount. According to him, Rabbi Kook encouraged the establishment of a synagogue on the Temple Mount, but asked that it be done through a chief rabbinic council decision. Rabbi Zivi Yehuda planned together with Rabbi Shiar Yeshuv HaKohen the establishment of a synagogue on the Temple Mount under the direction of the chief rabbinate. Rabbi Ariel concluded. A synagogue is obviously only a start. And as I said earlier, this is something that is taking place in stages. Nothing has changed. I know it's now November that I'm making this message, but even now, Jewish people are ascending the Mount. They're able to ascend the Mount. They're able to pray and prostrate themselves. And there is serious talk of building, at the very least, a synagogue on the Temple Mount. So as we are approaching the next major feast, Hanukkah, coming up, a time for the rededication of the temple, I'm really excited by the strong possibility of the rebuilding of the temple. Now, some of you might say, but wasn't Yeshua the final sacrifice? And the answer to that question might surprise you. The Torah warns us about subtracting from the commandments. Deuteronomy 4:2 says, "You shall not add to the word which I command you, neither shall you subtract a thing from it, that you may keep the commandments of Yahweh your Elohim, which I command you." Deuteronomy 4:2. And Deuteronomy 13:1 or 12:32, depending on whether you're looking at a Jewish or a Christian edition, "Whatever thing I command you observe to do it, you shall not add thereto, nor subtract from it." Moreover, the Torah tells us repeatedly that the commandments are to be filled for all generations forever. Exodus 17:21, "It shall be a statute forever in their generations." Exodus 38:43, "It shall be a statute forever to him and his seed after him." Exodus 29:28, "A statute forever." Exodus 30:21, "It shall be a statute forever to him and to his seed throughout their generations." Exodus 31:17, there's no shortage of these. Leviticus 6:18, 6:22, 7:34 and 36, 10:7, Leviticus 10:9 and 15, Leviticus 17:7, Leviticus 23:14, 21:41, Leviticus 24:3, Numbers 10:8, 15:15, 18:8, verse 11, verse 19, verse 23, chapter 19, verse 10, and Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 29. There's no shortage of verses in the Torah that tell us that the mitzvot are for all generations forever. And several of those statements, particularly in Leviticus, appear in specific context of the sacrificial offerings. Yeshua was, according to Revelation 13:8, the lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world. Yet nobody is arguing that from the foundation of the world there were no animal sacrifices. Paul writes in Hebrews chapter 10, verses 1 through 3, reading from the King James Version, "For the law, having a shadow of good things to come, and not the very image of things, can never, with those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually, make the comers thereto perfect. For then would they not have ceased to be offered? Because that the worshippers, once purged, should have no more conscience of sins. But in those sacrifices there is a remembrance again made of sins every year." And notice the implication that they didn't cease. Often when I talk to Christians about the Torah being everlasting for all generations, they respond by saying, "But the law was only a shadow." By this they allude to Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 through 17, and Romans 10:1 that we just looked at. Passages have been very misunderstood. Colossians chapter 2, verses 16 through 17, the KJV says, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat and drink, or in respect of a holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ." There are three issues that I want to look at here. First, the passage speaks not only of meat, but of drink. So it cannot be speaking about kosher laws, which deal with food, not drink. Paul's opponent here has differing views regarding meat, drink, holy days, new moons, and Sabbaths. Clearly, his opponent here are the Essene influence within the movement, which reemerged as the Ebionites. These proto-Ebionite Essene proto-Ebionites, basically, were doctrinal vegetarians. They all took the Nazirite vow and thus abstained from wine, and they used a solar calendar. Thus they differed from Paul on issues of meat, drink, holy days, new moons, and Sabbaths. So Paul is not speaking here about the validity of Torah. He's speaking about his opponent's positions on these issues. Secondly, there is the shadow issue. Now we know that Passover was a shadow of the Messiah fulfilled, yet rather than abolish the observance of Passover as a result, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 7 through 8, he says, "Therefore let us keep the feast." Lastly, we must look at the KJV use of italics here. The italics in the KJV indicate words that are not really in the Greek, but which the KJV added to the text. Now, I'm saying that in reference to the KJV, which was translated from Greek. This is supposed to be help to you in reading the text and making it make sense in English. But in some cases, like this one, the italics have been used to completely and radically change the meaning of the text. If we remove the italics, the italicized word "is" from the phrase "body is of Christ," we instead see the familiar phrase "body of Christ" or "body of Messiah," which appears over and over in the New Testament. Why would one disrupt that common phrase "body of Christ" by inserting the word "is"? If we reread the passage with the word "is" taken out, it says, "Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink, or in respect to a holy day, or the new moon, or the Sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body of Messiah," or the body of Christ. In other words, it is contrasting an individual man with the body of Messiah. Suddenly the passage no longer is contrasting shadow with body, but man with body of Messiah. On this idea that it's more important simply to understand the symbolic meaning of Torah commandments, not necessarily to actually observe them, Philo of Alexandria addressed this idea very well in his book on the migration of Abraham. He writes, beginning in section 89, he says, "For there are some men who, looking upon the written laws as symbols of things appreciable by the intellect, have studied some things with superfluous accuracy and have treated others with neglectful indifference, whom I should blame for their levity, for they ought to attend to both classes of things, applying themselves both to an accurate investigation of invisible things and also to an irreproachable observance of those laws which are of note. But now men living solitarily by themselves as if they were in a desert, or else as if they were souls unconnected with the body, and as if they had no knowledge of any city or village or house or in short, of any company of men whatsoever, overlook what appears to the many to be true, and seek for plain naked truth by itself, whom the sacred scriptures teaches not to neglect a good reputation, and not to break through any established customs, which divine men of younger wisdom than any in our time have enacted or established. Then he says, for although the seventh day is a lesson to teach us the power which existed in the uncreated God, and also the creature is entitled to rest from his labors, it does not follow that on that account we may abrogate the laws which establish respecting it, so as to light a fire, or till land, or carry burdens, or bring accusations, or conduct suits at law, or demand a restoration of a deposit, or exact the repayment of a debt, or do any of the other things which are usually permitted at times which are not days of festival. Nor does it follow that because the feast of the symbol of joy and soul, nor does it follow that because the feast is a symbol of the joy of the soul and his gratitude towards God, that we will repudiate the assemblies ordained at the periodical seasons of the year, nor because the rite of circumcision is an emblem of the excision of pleasures and of all the passions and of the destruction of the impious opinion, according to which the mind has imagined itself to be itself competent and produce offspring. Does it follow that we are to annul the law which has been enacted about circumcision? Since we shall neglect the laws about the due observance of the ceremonies in the temple, and the number of others too, if we exclude all figurative interpretation and attend only to those things which are expressly ordained in plain words. But it is right to think that this class of things resembles the body, and the other class of things... Sorry about that, let me pick back up here. But it is right to think that this class of things resembles the body, and the other class the soul. Therefore, just as we take care of the body, because it is the abode of the soul, so also we must take care of the laws that are enacted in plain terms for which they are regarded. Those other things also will be more clearly understood by which these laws are symbols. And in the same way, one will escape blame and accusation from men in general. So Philo is saying that the inner meaning, the symbolic meaning of these rituals is like the soul of the Torah. By the way, the Zohar says the same thing, by the way, that the inner meaning of these verses, the symbolic meaning of these verses is the soul of the Torah. But the soul can't exist in this world without the body. And so you have to have the body and the soul both. If you kill the body, the soul departs. And so you must keep the body healthy to keep the soul alive and healthy as well. And if we don't observe the Torah, we don't keep the mitzvot, then an allegory of nothing means nothing. So the allegory only has meaning. We learn through observing the Torah, and the allegory only has meaning because we carry out these observances. In fact, in Acts chapter 18, verse 18, Paul takes the Nazirite vow. It says, "And Paul after this tarried there yet a good while, and then took his leave of the brothers, and sailed thence into Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Centria, for he had a vow." Now, if you look in Numbers chapter 6, the Nazirite vow involves animal sacrifices. You look that up in Numbers chapter 6, verses 13 through 21. And then when we get to Acts chapter 21, verses 17, starting in verses 17, we read, And when we were come to Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. And the day following, Paul went in with us unto James, and all the elders were present. And when he had saluted them, he declared particularly what things God had wrought among the Gentiles by his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord and said unto him, You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews there are which believe, and they are all zealous of the Torah. And they have informed, and they are informed of you, that you teach not the Jews which are among the Gentiles. You teach the Jews that are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither to walk after the customs. What is it therefore? The multitude must needs come together, for they will hear that you are come. Do therefore this, and we say to you, we have 4 men which have a vow. It's talking about the Nazirite vow, number 6 again. Them take and purify themselves, and with them be it charges with them. They must shave their heads, and all may know that these things wherein they are informed concerning you are nothing but that you yourself also walk orderly and keep the Torah. As touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and concluded that they observe no such thing, that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols, and from blood, and from strangled, and from fornication. Then Paul took them in the next day, purifying himself with them, entering into the temple to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification, until an offering should be offered for every one of them. And if you look at Numbers chapter 6, verses 13 through 21, it's not taking a collection in the collection plate. It's talking about sacrificial offerings. And then finally, Acts 24:17 through 18. Now therefore, after many years, I came to bring alms to my nation and offerings. Thereupon certain Jews from Asia found me purified in the temple, neither with multitude nor with tumult. How you become purified in the temple, according to the Torah, this involved animal sacrifices again. Okay. In fact, we know that Yeshua was not the final sacrifice, because sacrifices and offerings will be made during the millennial kingdom. In Ezekiel chapter 40, verse 1 through chapter 48, verse 35, we are given a detailed account of a millennial temple and its services. And I'm not going to read it, but I'm going to give you some sections here you can go look up, and you will see that it describes, for example, in Ezekiel chapter 43, verses 18 through 27, it describes animal sacrifices taking place in the millennial kingdom, in the millennial temple. So Yeshua was not the final sacrifice. That doesn't negate the idea of the significance of Yeshua as the ultimate symbol of the sacrificial offerings. But it does mean that the sacrificial offerings and the need for a temple did not end with Yeshua. Okay? So there is good news in that the temple will be rebuilt, and events seem to be culminating towards that actually happening. And although I can't see exactly how it's going to happen, I couldn't see how we would get here from where we were in, if I was living in 1910, 1920, I would not be able to foresee Jews talking about, prostrating themselves on the Temple Mount, praying on the Temple Mount, and actually talking about the possibility of building a synagogue on the Temple Mount. So the time will come for the building of the temple. The red heifers are ready. The temple furnishings are ready, and even temple coins have been minted for the temple tax. So I want to remind everybody to please donate to support this work. You can do that by clicking the donate link in the video description, or sending donations by PayPal to donations@wnae.org. Like this video, click the notification bell so you get notified when new videos come out. Of course, subscribe to the channel. Let us know what you think in the comments. Participate in the discussions in the comments. Share this video with your friends on social media. Until next time, everybody, shalom.